Hello Year 11s and welcome to the video on monohybrid inheritance. Now on this slide we've got the key knowledge point here which has been taken from your study design. So we're looking at the predicted genetic outcomes for a monohybrid cross and a monohybrid test cross. We'll do the test cross in another video. So today we're really just focusing on the outcomes of a monohybrid cross. And we'll break down what that word means in a moment. So our success criteria that you can use a Punnett square to predict the outcomes of a genetic cross, and that you can use this or interpret that Punnett square to tell me the phenotypic and genotypic ratios. Okay, so here we're looking at using a Punnett square to predict monohybrid inheritance. So monohybrid inheritance is inheritance of the alleles for one gene at a time, one being the key word. And this word here, mono, does mean one. So when someone performs a monologue, it means it's one person giving a speech, or someone who has a monobrow would have one eyebrow. So to work out the inheritance of alleles, what we use is something called a Punnett square, which is this grid that you can see at the bottom of the screen here. Now we've got two flowers and we've crossed them, and we're basically working out what the possible offspring could be. So a little terminology reminder. These possible offspring, we call them the F1 generation. Okay, so the offspring, the potential offspring, that's the F1 generation. Now, if we were to go and to cross these, let's say this flower and this flower, in the future, that would then become the F2 generation. And if we were to cross their offspring, it would be F3 and so on and so forth. We refer to the parental generation as P, the parental generation. So we'll move on. Just a quick terminology reminder, and this is stuff you guys, I'm sure you all know, but just so it's in the forefront of your heads. Homozygous means two alleles that are the same. Hopefully you all remember, homos means same. Heterozygous means two alleles that are different, so hetero again, meaning different. So we can see that we've got our homologous chromosomes here, and the homozygous homologous chromosome has two copies of that same allele, the big B, the big B. Our heterozygous homologous chromosome, they've got two copies of alleles that are different, so the big B and the little b. So hopefully that's sort of in the forefront of your brain when you're thinking about this. And again, those homologous chromosomes, one's the maternal from the mother, one's the paternal from the father. Okay, so we'll look at how do we make a Punnett square? What's the first thing we need to do? The first thing is we need to make this grid. So a 3 by 3 grid. So with 9 squares. And what we do is we write the alleles of each parent in the top and the side. And we only put one letter in each box. So here we've got one of our parents. This parent has two copies of the dominant allele. And then on the side, we've got our other parent with two copies of the recessive allele. And now we need to fill in the empty boxes. So basically we read from the top and we say, okay, there's an A there and there's a little a, so I can fill that in. And I would have A, and I'll just fill it in there. And we go and we do the same process for this one, A, same process for this one, A. And we can see that all of our offspring, they have the same genotype, and that genotype is heterozygous. Okay, so now we're looking at constructing a Punnett square. So the question is asking us to use purple people eaters, these creatures that you see on the screen. So it tells us that one horn is dominant, so having one horn, like the creature on the left, and having no horns is recessive. Okay, so it says draw a Punnett square showing the cross of a purple people eater that is hybrid for horns with a purple people eater that does not have horns. So the first thing that we can look at before we go and try and do the cross is that it says we're a purple people eater that is hybrid for horns. That's sort of another way of saying heterozygous. Okay, so that means it's got two different alleles, and we can see, luckily they've given us the genotype here. It's got the big dominant allele and the recessive allele. And this is crossed with a purple people eater that does not have horns. And again, because they've given us the genotype, we can see it's homozygous recessive. It has two copies, homos, two being the same, two copies of the same allele, the recessive allele. Now, this question, it's a little bit simpler. It's given us the genotypes already, but what you need to be aware of is with these questions, you will need to be able to use logic to identify what the genotype is if you aren't given the genotype in the question. So for example, we can tell that this one here, our recessive purple people eater, or our homozygous recessive purple people eater, has to be homozygous recessive because it doesn't have any horns, and we know that not having horns is recessive. The other purple people eater, if we weren't given that genotype and we weren't told that it was heterozygous, it could have been heterozygous, HH, or it could have been homozygous dominant. Those are the possible genotypes. Okay, so now we've got to go ahead and fill in our Punnett square. So the first thing we do is we take our parents, and we're taking this purple people eater here, the one with the horn, who's heterozygous, and we're filling in their information there, H and H. And then we're taking our other homozygous recessive purple people eater, and we're filling in their information on the side. And then we need to go in and fill in the possible offspring that they could have. So here, H, one copy there, H, one copy there, right? Here, we take our H, and then we take our H from over here, and we have another one over here. We take our H from here, our H from here. And I have that pre-filled, so let me fill it in. Maybe just erase it so you can see it a little bit clearer. Okay, so we can see down here in our F1 generation all the possible offspring that would happen if these two purple people eaters were to decide to have children together. So this doesn't mean that they've had 4 children and these are the 4 children that they've had. What this means is if they decided to have offspring together, these are the potential genotypes that their offspring could have. Okay, so these are the possible genotypes that they could have. So you can see here, there would be homozygous recessive. We can divide this into quarters, right? This is 1 quarter, this is another quarter, this is another quarter. Okay, this is another quarter. So there's a 2 quarters or 50% chance that their offspring would be homozygous recessive, and then another 2 quarters or 50% chance that their offspring is heterozygous. Okay, so now we're going to sort of go into that genotypic and phenotypic ratios in a little bit more detail. So Punnett squares, they allow us to show what the possible offspring might be and to predict the ratio, the genotypic and phenotypic ratio. So the genotypic and phenotypic ratios, they tell us what we'd expect, so the expected frequency of genotypes and phenotypes in the offspring. Genotypic ratios, we always start by writing the homozygous dominant first. So that would be HH there. Then we write our heterozygous. In our purple people eaters, we're using the alleles as H. And then we write our homozygous recessive next. That's just the convention, so it's important to remember. And when we're talking about the phenotypic ratios, so not the actual genes, but the genes that are expressed and what we can observe, we write the dominant phenotype first, so has horns in the purple people eater example, and then the recessive phenotype next. Okay.